Star Citizen has a problem on its hands, and it's arguably the biggest for the game overall. With over 120 unique ships and a huge amount of features and functionality meant for interoperability between them, there's a hefty amount of work that needs to be done to keep them up to date for a game that still hasn't technically been released. The ships have been sold to fund the development of the game, yes, but now that development has and continues to be carried out in the delectable flavors of engineering, the Maelstrom damage system, the cargo refactor, the room system, interactive buttons, and generally improving ship construction metrics. With all these new standards and features comes a distinct difference between the ships built with them in mind and the ones that haven't yet been updated. So how does Star Citizen avoid becoming new ship weighted amongst the players? The gold standard. In this supporter exclusive released in October, we'll be looking at the ship gold standard that every ship needs, why this standard is a moving target that needs to be nailed down soon, and all the work involved. If you'd like to see these videos when they are published, you can join us on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member below for monthly exclusive videos, live podcast access, and maybe someday a tomato shipped right to your front door. For all those who have, thank you for supporting my tomato talks. Star Citizen is a really weird case. It's a game that aims way too big for its position. As a studio's first game, it would have been a much better time creating a finished product ready for commercial release and building on subsequent editions and games from there. But that's not what they went for. Instead, the company aimed to produce two games simultaneously that could both earn the often mislabeled label of AAA. At the same time, they waved off the idea of large publishers and, for the most part, gave private investment the cold shoulder. They went for an almost completely crowdfunded model, which has its ups and downs. One major down is that the community that funds the game needs a constant reason to keep funding, i.e. access to the game. So while trying to build these two games, one being an MMO, commonly seen as one of the more difficult genres to break into, they needed to also make sure something was playable, relatively stable, and always improving. You may disagree with those adjectives to certain degrees, but that's the goal. So, two games of huge scale, one being an MMO, maintaining a playable experience in the meantime, and oh yeah, they didn't have a game engine. While the game started out on CryEngine, and they actually acquired many of the developers responsible for the engine itself, it was in no way made for what Star Citizen was trying to be. So the team set out to essentially build a new game engine from that foundation. 10 years later, they have something pretty good, but it's only just starting to reach a phase of optimization. So that's the story of how we got here, but all throughout those 10 years, the company needed funding. I won't lie to you, quite a few mistakes were made in communication, management of the project, and the delivery of the single-player game, Squadron 42. Between those issues and the long development time, it's taken a lot of money to get where we are, and ship sales were the only thing bringing in those monies. But selling ships before the actual gameplay is complete is literally putting the cart before the horse. The mechanics that would shape the ships themselves are only really starting to show up now. Engineering is defining components, the space they need, the systems the ship needs to monitor and transfer power to them, even the size of the doorways that they need to move through. Life support puts into focus certain ships and how their atmosphere may vent when a door is opened. Maelstrom is replacing the innards of the ships with actual materials that'll represent their construction. Cargo and modularity render certain ships unusable to an extent until they can get the proper functionality to work out how they're meant to. Many ships don't even fly how they're meant to in atmosphere due to a lack of active control surfaces. Everywhere you look, there are blinding examples of outdated ships, and while much of their designs were made with these things in mind, it's not until the code is actually written and the in-game assets are functioning that the devs really know the exact dimensions a ship needs. Take the Zeus CL as an example. The tractor beam placement on this ship makes way more sense than that of older ships. It is also releasing with a refined shield component system, because it was built at a time when engineering was a serious consideration. You can look at the Reclaimer, a ship built with a cool design that ultimately ended up playing quite differently, at least currently, because that's how the gameplay turned out. The Reclaimer is actually a very good example of a ship that was sold to raise money, released into the game before its gameplay was even realized, and likely will now need a major rework to match the specifics of how it will work in practice. The Freelancer series of ships has also recently seen a minor update to match engineering functionality. The 600i is overdue for a design update to make better use of an interior that just didn't meet the standard for the game. Everywhere you look, these ships, which have made this game possible to build, are hurting for updates to get them ready for the actual game that they're meant to fit in. With so many promised features and functionality, this kind of tech debt was pretty inevitable to some extent. And in comes the gold standard that every ship needs. So let's take a look at what the gold standard update looks like and how CIG could go about updating all these ships for the eventual commercial release of Star Citizen. The gold standard update for ships in Star Citizen is changing all the time. It's more of a developmental term than anything, really just about supporting features that have come online since the ship in question was released. Going back in and adding interactivity to items, metrics for doorways, corridors, dashboards, and MFDs, lights, switches, refueling ports, and other small details that are outdated. As things like full cockpit interactivity with buttons, relay-driven power management, and even physical buttons for opening and closing doors are standardized, the older ships need to receive those same updates. That being said, we know that component functionality is the biggest reason for most ship reworks, and with engineering coming online, we could start seeing these reworks happen more often. And while you could argue these updates should happen for each ship with each new feature, the teams are all busy doing current work. To take time away for incremental upgrades is likely a really inefficient way to do it. Instead, the reworks need to be timed to include the most updates for the most important ships. The Freelancer, as I said, has seen a small update for components and engineering, but the devs know it'll need yet another update later on. They have triaged the impact this update would make and how popular the ship is and decided it was worth it right now. But these kinds of updates are honestly a rare occurrence because, for the most part, that moving target of gold standard is still moving too fast. While sometimes the ship just simply needs some changes and the gold standard update can give the team a chance to implement those changes that were initially missed, like with the Freelancer, most ships need actual features online before these changes make sense. We all would like to see the 600i rework hit the game, but the fact probably is that until deep space probing and full scanning gameplay or passenger transport gameplay are fully defined, the team doesn't want to finalize the ship design that may need updating shortly after. It's always good to remember the later the ship that you like is made, the better it's going to be. But this kind of hesitancy with ships is less of a worry for something like, say, the Sabre, which saw its gold standard recently in addition to the Sabre Raven variant. As fighters, there's not much to consider down the road that might call for a lot of changes again, and with this gold standard the team was able to produce 2 more variants of the ship, though the gameplay necessity of that move was questionable. Contrast this with something like that 600i, which is going to see almost the entire interior layout changing. Other ships like the Starfarer, Reclaimer, and Constellation may also see major reworks like this down the line when the time comes. The older the ship, generally, the bigger the change when updating to the gold standard. The Retaliator is another ship that saw significant updates. We saw the airlocks change in location to better accommodate the game going forward, and the interior shifted around to make more sense of the old design. While this update brought it up to 2024 standards, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't see another smaller update in the future. The only reason it was update was probably its inclusion in Squadron 42 and its status as a test bed for modularity in ships. Speaking of Squadron 42, if you haven't noticed the Gladius always being kept up to date with whatever is going on in ship development, hi, this is the Gladius. Nice to meet you. This is the primary ship in Squadron 42, and it's almost universally the test bed for new tech and consistently kept up to the gold standard every couple of years. While it makes sense, you know what ships really need to be gold standard every year? The basic game package ships. Your Aurora, Mustang, Pisces, Cutter, and Reliant even should be providing the best starting experience for new players, but they unfortunately don't see the same polish as newer vessels. This is one of the more painful parts of the studio building this game and encouraging people to play it in the meantime. That gameplay needs to be fulfilling. Players should be able to reliably get in their ship and move components or refuel or manage power, but their ship simply might not be able to do it. And when it can't, it can be incredibly confusing and frustrating to new players and old alike when the game simply doesn't work as they've been led to believe it's supposed to. And every time the studio takes time to make that possible to update these older ships, not only does the ship fall behind again, but it uses valuable dev resources that can be put towards newer gameplay features. Now, I think CIG has a ton of work ahead of them for this. It's a pretty big ongoing problem that will plague the game alongside their ship backlog, all the way up until and likely past a 1.0 commercial release. But I think they're trying pretty hard to grow and retain a ship team that can routinely get these ships updated once we do pass that tipping point of ship features that need to be updated. There's no doubt in my mind that by the time the game reaches a commercial release, the ships will still not be in a perfect state. But I'm interested in seeing how the company moves to mitigate this issue over the coming years by growing the team and doing enough to support them. Because as annoyed as you might get that more ships get released, until the game is in a place to use cosmetics to fund the development, those ships will support the updating of older models as well. And this is the biggest problem that Star Citizen has to deal with. So when is the right time to update each ship to its gold standard? Well, it's hard to say. Every ship is weighted differently, and while it'd be nice to update them all at the same frequency, the needs of the game will always win out. Whether that's because new gameplay is coming online, Squadron 42 demands it, an easy ship can provide good training for incoming developers, or a hole in the lineup can be filled by an easy new ship to sell. We don't like the way it works, but this is how it works. They put themselves in a tough position with a project that demands so much funding, and now unfortunately they've got to figure out a way to deliver. And hopefully, with some of the bigger, more demanding features like Maelstrom, the resource network, the flight model, and server meshing reaching levels that don't require as much work, we can get a better idea of how this gold standard is being handled. Thanks for watching this video. I release these deeper dives into the development of the game every month for supporters, to try and provide more context and backstory around the history and reasons for Star Citizen's development. If you'd like to see them when they are published, catch our podcasts live and chat with our guests, get your referral code in our referral code randomizer under every video, or get behind the scenes access to our videos and production process, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a YouTube channel member down below. It helps us keep making content, and every new member is another tomato planted in the garden. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.